Hey fellow Blender Maniacs, this is Alex Cordbard for BlenderMania3D.com, and yes, in this tutorial, we're going to take a look at sculpting in Blender 2.8 because sculpting is awesome and really fun. Here's a little sculpt that I did. This is just a quick little sculpt, and I want to show you in this video the different brushes and the different tools that we can use in order to sculpt whatever it is that we want in Blender. So during this tutorial, we're going to be sculpting character head, but at the same time learning all the different tools and brushes. So let's get right to it. Opening up a new file. And we are not going to delete the default cube. Oh my god. It's a miracle. All right, with the default cube selected, we're actually going to use it. But we want to start with a little bit more vertices in Blender for sculpting. Go to the modifiers tab. We're going to add a modifier, and you could either use two modifiers. You could use the subdivision surface modifier, or you could use the multi-resolution modifier. For here, we're just going to use the subdivision surface modifier, increase the viewport number to 2, and apply it. Alright, cool. Now let's go into sculpt mode. Either hitting Control Tab, or going up here, switch it to sculpt mode. And now we are officially in sculpt mode. Now, in sculpt mode, all your sculpting options are found under the screwdriver and wrench icon right here. You can see that we have our brush, texture, stroke, fall off, and a bunch of other settings which we'll take a look at. But for now, we're going to take a look at all the different brushes. Here on the left, all of these beautiful little spherical icons are the different brushes. If we left click and drag when we have the double-sided arrow, we could drag it out so that we could see the name of the brushes. Alright, now a couple of things that we will take a look at before we take a look at the draw brushes is that right now we have the x-axis symmetrical setting enabled. So it will basically mirror it along the x-axis. Anything that we sculpt on this side will be mirrored on this side and vice versa. You can also find this option over here under symmetry. You can see mirror X, and it's also up here. So a lot of these settings that are up here, you could also find them over here. It's the same exact thing. Now the next thing we want to take a look at, which is the most important, is the dynamic topology option, which is right here. Now right now it's not enabled. So if we have the draw brush right here and just sculpt, you can see it sculpts with the amount of vertices that we have. However, if you turn on dynamic topology either here or here and enable it, just click OK. Dynamic topology, what it does is as you sculpt, it will actually add geometry to your mesh. How cool is that? And the amount of geometry it adds is dictated by this detail size right now. So right now it's adding the detail size of 12 pixels. And as it says, it's the maximum edge length for each of the edges or faces that it's adding. So now if we draw it, check it out. If we go into wireframe mode, Z wireframe, you can see it's added a bunch of geometry. Now this is also affected. I'm going to hit Control Z. It's affected by how far or zoomed out you are. So if we draw it here, you can see it adds that much detail. If we zoom in and draw it like that, you can see the detail is much finer. So keep that in mind. Depending on how far zoomed in or out you are, depends how much detail it will add. Alright, I'm going to hit Control Z and let's get right to it. I'm going to hit 1 on the keyboard to go into front view, and we're first going to take a look at the draw brush. Now, as the draw brush implies, it basically draws on geometry onto your mesh. If we left click and drag, we could draw geometry, and if we hold down Control, it draws it in the opposite way. So let's go ahead and draw in by holding Control, 2 eyeballs or 1 eyeball here, and it will be mirrored on the x-axis. So we're going to put in the eyeball sockets. Alright, cool. Other features that are very useful is the radius of the brush. This is the size of your brush, which you could change right here under radius. Or you could hit the F key, which is a shortcut key for the radius. And then the next one is the strength, which is the strength of your brush, which you could adjust here, or hit Shift F to adjust the strength and make it stronger or less strong. So F for radius, Shift F for strength. All right, that is the draw brush right there. Let's go ahead and also draw by holding Control a little bit of a mouth. Believe it or not, this is exactly how I started that first sculpt that you saw at the beginning of the video. All right, let's take a look at another brush over here. We have the smooth brush, which is right here, smooth. The smooth brush, if we left click and drag, you can see it smooths out whatever we sculpted. I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that. Let's put the strength of the smooth brush to 0.2 or 3. And now we could smooth out whatever we sculpt. Now instead of switching to the smooth brush, we could just stay on the draw brush, and if you hold down the Shift key, it will automatically switch to the smooth brush. So here I'm going to indent the mouth a little bit more, and there we go. And now let's actually use the draw brush. Instead of inverting it, let's draw in some eyebrows right there, and maybe a little bit of a nose like that. All right, cool. So we're getting a little bit of a shape there. You can see we got a little head thing. Very creepy. All right, let's take a look at another brush. But before we use that brush, I'm going to left click and draw the beginning of some horns right here. And now we're going to take a look at the grab brush. Now the grab brush, as the name implies, allows for you to grab geometry and pull it out. So if we grab what we just drew right there, we could grab these out and extrude out some horns. Now the grab brush, when you do the draw brush, it adds geometry. As you saw with the grab brush, it does not add geometry, so keep that in mind. If you pull it out a lot, you'll start to get a little low on geometry, as you could see here. All right, but that is the grab brush. Next brush we're going to take a look at is the rotate brush. Now the rotate brush, as the name implies, allows for you to rotate stuff. So here we could left click and rotate the horns out however we want, like that. And you can see it allows for us to rotate it. Same with the eyebrows. We could click the eyebrows and rotate them down a little bit, and then grab the grab brush and grab them and bring him down so that he's more angry and fierce like that. Sweet. So that's the grab brush. Next is the pose brush, and this is a really cool brush. This allows for you to pose your mesh. So right here we have the horns. We can left click and actually pose them kind of like you would an armature, and check that out. How cool is that? So there we've just posed the horns just like that. And then I'm going to hit Shift to smooth it out a little bit. So that's the pose brush. All right, what other brushes can we take a look at? Let's take a look at the crease brush. Now for that, first I want to make some frown lines here. With the draw brush, hit F to make your brush smaller. We're going to left click and let's make some frown lines right there. And just left click over it to make it deeper. Control left click. All right, now the crease brush, again, as the name implies, I know. I'm going to hit F to increase the circle a little bit. The crease brush will basically crease and pinch together your geometry like that. So we'll bring it into a sharper crease, and then we can hold down Shift to smooth that out. And there we go. Check it out. We have some frown lines. So the crease brush is very, very useful for wrinkles and things like that. Folds of skin, wrinkles, etc., etc. All right, that's the crease brush. Very, very useful. Next brush we're going to take a look at is the blob brush. Now the blob brush basically creates a blob or a wart on your character. So if we left click and drag, it's kind of like the draw brush, but it creates more of a blob type shape. So here we could add a couple of warts on our character, and then just hold down the Shift key to smooth it out. And boom, there we go. And you could also invert this one as well by holding down Control. Sweet. There we go. We got some blob or warts there. Next brush we're going to take a look at is the inflate brush. Now the inflate brush basically inflates your mesh or your geometry. So here I'm going to use it on the nose to make the nose a little bit bigger. And you will see that it kind of inflates it, or looks like it's putting air into it and making it bigger. And of course you could deflate by holding down Control. Cool. The next brush is the layer brush. Now the layer brush doesn't add any geometry either. So I'm first going to go to draw, and a cool thing that you could do is with the draw brush, you could put the strength very low and then just draw on here and hold down Shift to smooth it, and you can see now you have a bunch more geometry, but you didn't actually change the structure of the mesh. Let's go ahead and do that over the whole mesh. With the draw brush, the strength very low, just draw all over it and then hold down Shift to smooth it out, and this will basically add a lot of geometry so that we have some more geometry to play with. I'm just going to kind of do it all over here. So again, with the draw brush at a very low setting, I'm just drawing and then holding down the Shift key to smooth it out, and you can see that now we got a bunch more geometry to play with, which will be good in the long run. All right, cool. Let's continue. The brush that we're going to look at is the layer brush. So the layer brush right here, if you drag it out, you can see it basically adds a layer to your character or to your sculpt. Now right here, the strength is pretty high, which is fine, as I want to add a kind of crest right here on top of our character. All right, cool. There we go. Next brush is the clay strips brush. Now the clay strip brush is basically, if you could imagine clay, it basically adds a strip of mesh or clay to your character, like so. And you could layer it on top of the previous one, just like that. And there we go. Now we got some weird looking little sideburns on our little sculpt right here. Cool. And then we have the clay brush, which is basically kind of like the draw brush. However, it acts a little bit differently, and I personally don't really use it too much, but there you go. Then we got the draw sharp brush. Now the draw sharp brush basically draws in a more sharp way where it kind of merges and is pointed at the top. So right here you can see if we hold down Control and draw it out, it kind of draws it, but it's also more tapered or pointy at the very tip. You can see it better right here. Also, if you don't hold down Control, it's automatically inverted, but if you hold down Control, it goes the other way, and you can see it's kind of more, it peaks more than just the draw brush right here. If I put the strength at 5, you can see the draw brush is a lot smoother, where the draw sharp is a lot more pointed. All right, I'm going to hit Control Z on that. Cool. Now, let's see, what other brushes have we not looked at? Flatten brush. The flatten brush, let's see, what can we do to flatten him? Let's flatten the bottom of the head right here. So the flatten brush, as the name implies, basically just flattens and pushes down the geometry. You can see that now it's pretty flat right there, and boom, we could extrude or grab out a neck from there. The fill brush, as the name implies, helps you to fill out some crevices and holes, as you can see. Now, the scrape brush, basically, as the name implies, allows for you to kind of scrape the clay. Now, you can imagine sculpting like you're playing with clay, so you could get kind of the idea of what it looks like there. The pinch brush. Pinch brush is pretty cool. Let's do it on the nose. The pinch brush basically pinches geometry together. It's kind of like the crease brush. However, it acts slightly different, but as you can see, it pinches the surrounding geometry together. Let's actually do it on the eyebrow, make these a little more prominent. And there we go. I personally never use the pinch brush. I just use the crease brush, but that's just me. Next, we have the grab brush, which we saw. Elastic deform. Now, this is kind of like pretending your clay is more elastic or elasticity. And you can see it's kind of like the grab brush. However, it affects the surrounding area a lot more and makes it kind of more elasticy. So, for example, for this, If we wanted to, we could go in front view and just grab his face and kind of bring it together so that's not as big. And then I'm going to grab the mouth. And actually, let's use the grab brush. I'm going to open his mouth so he's more screaming. And with the grab brush, let's grab right here in between his eyebrows and bring this down, and also the eyebrows, so he looks a lot meaner and more evil. All right, there we go. Cool. And look at that. We're starting to get something pretty cool. The next is a snake hook brush. The snake hook brush is really cool. We could have made the horns with it, but instead, let's go ahead and let's make some smaller horns, I guess. The snake hook brush basically is kind of like the grab brush. However, it pulls and kind of extrudes as you go. So if we left click here and drag out, you can see it pulls and extrudes it out. However, again, it does not add geometry, but it's just a really cool brush which grabs and snake hooks out like that. So let's create a couple of horns right there. And boom, check it out. Our character is getting character. Ha ha ha. Funny. Thumb brush. Thumb brush basically acts, if you could imagine clay again, it acts as you pushing your thumb against the clay. So right here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to push it up a little bit. And personally, I never really use this brush. I just prefer other brushes. But you can see it's kind of like pressing your thumb against the clay and pushing it up. All right, the pose brush, we looked at that. The nudge brush, kind of like the thumb brush, where it just kind of nudges the vertices and everything around. Again, personally, don't really use it. Rotate brush, we took a look at that. And now, let's take a look at some other of these cool brushes here. We have the simplify brush, which basically simplifies your geometry. Right now, it's still pretty simple. It's not really high detail, so it's not really going to do much. So we're not going to look at that right now. We have the mask brush. Now, the mask brush is really cool. I actually don't really use it, but let's say, especially when you get into more detail, let's say you want to modify this surrounding area, but you don't want to affect the eyebrows. Well, with the mask brush, just draw over your eyebrows like that. And then if you grab the draw brush and you just add a lot of geometry here, you can see it doesn't affect anywhere where it's masked. And then if you go back to the mask brush and hold down Control to remove it, you can see that your eyebrows are intact and they haven't been changed at all. How cool is that? So that is the mask brush. I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that because we have completely ruined our character. Next is box mask, which is the same thing, but if you left click and drag, you can mask it in a box type setting. Of course, you could always turn off the X the X mirror so that it doesn't mirror on the X axis. But in the meantime, it's very useful. Otherwise, we'd have to do everything twice. The box hide brush, as the name implies, basically just hides geometry, which again could be very useful, especially when you get into more detail, to be able to just hide geometry. To unhide it, hold down Control and left click and drag. One last brush I want to go over quickly. Now, you may or may not have this because this is in Blender 2.83, and right now it's not the official release of 2.83, but a really cool brush, and I want to go over this because it is awesome, is this new cloth brush that we have here. Now, currently it does not have an icon and it says none, but when you're doing this tutorial, you might see it. And the cloth brush basically acts as cloth. It makes it so that you could sculpt cloth-like wrinkles. Now, the cloth brush, unlike the other brushes, you can see that when I go to the cloth brush here, I have some other settings on it. And the cloth brush is actually physics-based. So we have cloth mass and cloth damping right here, which basically affects the cloth brush. Right now, if I left-click and drag on this, you can see it drags it out and creates kind of wrinkle-like cloth material. Now, the most important setting here is a cloth mass. This is how heavy the sculpt or the cloth is. The heavier it is, or the higher the number, the more it will take to drag it out. The less the number, the easier. So let's put this to like 0.2. And now if we left click and drag, you can see that it acts like cloth. How cool is that? Now this brush is super awesome in that you could really easily create wrinkles on your character by left clicking and dragging out, and again it acts like a cloth. So check that out. Very easily we've added in wrinkles to our character, cloth-like material, and of course this is very useful for cloth, wrinkles, any kind of fabric that is going to have wrinkles or cloth-like material. Now, of course, we'll take a look at more of these settings later on, but just want to throw this brush in there as well because it's going to be a new addition to the Blender sculpting brushes, and it is just awesome. All right, so that is basically the brushes that we have here. Let's go ahead and save our sculpt right here. Save as, and we're going to save it. I'm going to save it as tutorial sculpt 1, and I'm going to save it because in the next tutorial, or in the next part of this series of sculpting, we're going to take a look at some of the other options here and get into more detail and etc. etc. So make sure to save your sculpt. I'll see you in the next video. Ciao for now. Au revoir.